Hey guys, it's Jim Bounds with Motorhome Rehab Ranch, and the question was asked, what about the background, my background here? There's less in the background, you can be more paying to me. My thought was at the ranch, at the office, there's all that stuff. If you get bored with me, you could look at some of that. But anyway, I'm here at the beach house today. And I wanted to put out a video, the last one about going to Utah and back, and what some of my gauges meant. There were several questions about what kind of gauges do I have, what do I use, and things like that. And let me show you a little bit about what I did. First of all, that's a beautiful sight. That was coming in on A1A at real late at night, bright lights on. It was very, very nice. Let's look here for a second. Okay, this is my gauge cluster. Now, the cluster itself is one of Mac McNeil's old dashes. It was a basic panel that I had kept over the years, and all the gauges are a conglomeration of gauges over the years I've kept and that I've enjoyed using. So everything is different, but it gives me the information I want to know. All right. So let's look at this for a second. I've had this up for about a week, and you may have looked at it and said, wait a minute, something's wrong there. Well, there is. First of all, let's start at the left over here. This is kind of fuzzy, but right here is a transmission temperature gauge. Now, it's an electric gauge, and we talked before about electric gauge is basically a voltmeter with a calibrated sender, okay? Also, gauges read where you put the sender, all right? Now, I'm reading about 150 degrees. I have a cooler, so the coolant goes out of the transmission to the radiator, which brings it up to a moderate temperature, or holds it at a moderate temperature. Then it goes to a cooler and drops it down further and then back into the pan. Now, my sender is in the pan. So what I'm looking at is 150 degrees of the fluid getting ready to be used. Sometimes we'll put the sender on the output of the transmission to see the energy that's being used. In this case, I had a Ragusa pan, so it had an extra sender hole, so we put it in there. As you're driving, like 150 degrees going down the highway, that's the reservoir. That's not what the energy is being doing. My guess, if I put the sender on the output, we'd probably be around 200 or 180, somewhere around in there. And going up a hill, I would get 180 degrees. So it went up 30 degrees. Going up hills and things. So if you relate that to work energy done, so if we're at 190 degrees and you run it another 30 degrees up, so you at 220, 230, that's probably more accurate of actually energy done, okay? So that gauge is over here. I like it to be up where I can see that because I drive hills. I'm a flatlander, you guys know, but I drive hills by the transmission gauge. If it starts to spike, that's when I slow down a little bit. Next gauge over here that you can't read is my voltmeter. Now I'm using a one-wire alternator, which means the light, the generator light that you're used to seeing on your dash will not work. That generator light on the dash is part of the trigger circuit that we want to turn off, okay? So when you put a one-wire alternator in, that light will be gone. You want to use a voltmeter, okay? Now, in my case, fire the engine up, turn the key on, it's about 12 and a half, somewhere around in there. Turn the key on and fire it up and it's still at 12 and a half. What's that about? Rev it one time to kick in the regulator. Boom, goes up to 14.1, okay? If you want to know that it's right, as you're watching, turn your headlights on, you'll see it flicker a little bit. That means the regulator is sees more current drain and it compensates for that. Okay, so you want to have a voltmeter on your dash. All right. Now, next thing over here is a speedometer. Now, wait a minute. Speedometer was showing 0. What's that about? Well, these aftermarket gauges, dashes use a lot of different aftermarket gauges. And the gauge that was in here, that gauge is about a 15-year-old marine application gauge that as it started to run, it would start to tick. And that one's ticking. I had another gauge to put in, a VDO gauge, but the cable where it came in, it was a screw-in cable, and what we have is a snap-in, so it wouldn't work. I'm getting ready to leave to go to Utah. I said, to heck with it. So what did I do? Come on. I went, there we go. This is Osborne. If you remember, Osborne was my old Android phone. But I have the speedometer program in Osborne. So I have the speedometer and I have a trip odometer, so I can do that mileage. Like I say, check how many miles you use for gas and all that. Don't believe the gas gauge. So I have him up here tie wrapped to my FiTech machine where it's heads up and I can see it. So that gauge is nothing. The tach. Now, if you look at the tach, you know how most of your tachs have a needle that you can preset, okay? Well, I have it preset at 60 miles an hour. So I don't really need to look at the speedometer as much as I just go to 60. And what do you want to try to keep your foot if you're driving and you're not keeping it on the speed real well? Well, if you just keep that yellow, the red, which is your tach, on the yellow mark, which is your preset, your speed's going to stay the same. So you won't catch yourself thinking about something, doing something, slowing down, or anything like that. So that's the tachometer. The next one over here is water temp. Now, this is a mechanical gauge, not an electric gauge. It's something I really, really want to know, and I really, really want to be accurate. Okay? So that's a mechanical gauge. Now, the mechanical gauge is telling me we're running, excuse me, about 185, 189. Which I find, I have a 180-degree thermostat. I find that usually they'll run about 10 degrees above your thermostat rating, okay? So we're reading about 100, 195 on that. Now, over on the FiTech module here, I also have coolant here, and it's reading at about 179. So it means that it's reading about 8 to 10 degrees lower, okay? Why? There was a thread on Facebook last week about this. To be honest with you, I'm not really sure why. And could you recalibrate it to be correct? Maybe. I've never called. It just always worked, and so I just kind of left it. But this one absolutely is a mechanical gauge. It tells me exactly what my temperature is, and I want to know that. That's getting a little bit crazy. If you have a good electric gauge, it'd be fine. You don't have to worry about that much. Now, below that is the one that I normally put tape on. That's the gas gauge. Okay, now my sender that I put in my single tank coming back, it did work, but it stayed at full for a long, long time. And when it hit a half, I put gas in. And it usually took about 15 to 17 gallons, which means it's not linear, okay? So half a tank, you've used more than half a tank, okay? That's another reason why you don't believe the gas gauge. Check your mileage, and watch your fuel, okay? Because this gas gauges lie. This gauge is a dual air gauge, left and right side. I think it's pretty important to know. Matter of fact, it happened to me. We blew airline on the driver's side, and poof, it went down, and that gauge went down. The black one went down, so whoop, we pulled over. So I really do feel that if you had a dual needle gauge and it showed left and right air pressure, it would really help you know that what happened. Because if I did not have that, I knew the left side went down. Was it a tire? Was it whatever? I don't know. But when that gauge went down, that told me it was the air system. So you may want to do that. And then over here is oil pressure. Okay, oil pressure. It's an electric gauge. All right, pretty reliable. This is an autometer gauge. When my engine is cold, I've got about 60 pounds of pressure. 50, 55, 60 pounds of pressure. When it's hot, as you can see here, I have about 38, which means you lose about half of your oil pressure, not quite half, but somewhere around half your oil pressure from cold to hot. Okay, and then when you're driving, you'll get some of it back. So I've got about 38 pounds of pressure going down the road. What's my speed? 60 miles an hour. Okay, so at 60 miles an hour, you can see where the yellow needle and the black needle's almost, yellow needle and red needle on the tach is just about together. Oil pressure is 38 pounds. Okay. Oil pressure and water temperature gauges are important. Even on our original coach where it had the idiot gauge, you can still get an idea on where you are. And that's what you want to do. Oil pressure, you want to know that you have higher oil pressure cold, lower oil pressure hot. You want to know your water temperature goes to a point, whatever that point is, and sits there. It just sits there. Water temperature. Now, transmission temperature on hills, but water temperature should sit there at a quarter and not move. What's a quarter? Well, my gauge, my mechanical says a quarter is about 189, 190 degrees. Okay. So these are the gauges on my dash. Now over here, this is the FiTech unit. And this is the thing that saved me going out to Utah and back. If you ever looked at the main screen on a FiTech, there's like 25 or 30 different things that it's looking at real time. And if you're going to sit there and not watch the road and play with it, you'll kill yourself. But FiTech has got it set up where you can select 4 of the parameters and show them real time in a larger screen so you can see them. Now the gauges that the needles we set up, first I want to know my vacuum. Vacuum tells you where the butterfly is open and how much fuel you're using. If you can have the most amount of vacuum with the least amount of, or most amount of speed and the most amount of vacuum, that's where you're going to save the most amount of gas. Okay. Now, right here, I'm running about 8.1 at 60 miles an hour. Okay. If you can keep 10 inches of vacuum, 10, 12 inches of vacuum at 60 miles an hour, you're probably saving gas. I may have been going up a hill, or probably when I pushed the button, my foot hit it in it, but we were running about 10 inches of vacuum. The AFR, in here in the bottom left, AFR, air-fuel ratio. The AFR on this is 13.3. What you want to have is there's a lot of discussions about this, but 14.1 is where 14 measures of air, 1 measure of fuel, it mixes, and that's where you want it to be, okay? Now this thing says I'm at 3.3. So, well, how did it get to 3.3? Over here, AFR trim. Think about this. This is 14.1. Say it needed to make an adjustment, it had to go up to be at 14.1, okay? So as you're trying to keep 14.1, the air fuel trim is offsetting what it needs to get it back to 0. This AFR trim is what told us that we were having fuel delivery issues, because as the fuel filter clogged up, the AFR trim had to add more air because the fuel was being restricted. Now, we could have looked at fuel flow, it's true, but when we latched onto this told me long before the engine failed that we needed to pull over. And Jason had it down to about, we actually videoed it, we'll got some content I'll show you sometime, about 2 minutes, because we had the 100 micron glass filter on the outside of the frame. Now there's a thread right now talking about how do you get to the outside. And I know some people hate this and all that, but we drilled through. Right in the middle of the C channel, there's less stress. You drill through when we came through with the fuel. I know some people are going, oh, don't do that. You can't go under because you're going to drag it. And it's really not a good idea to go above, because if for some reason it gets crushed, now you could put a hockey puck on each side. That would give you an inch, and then you could run the hose through there. But we went ahead and we drilled a hole, I know, into the 100 micron glass filter that we could get to. Then that went to the electric fuel pump, because we're running FiTech. And we're not running the forced fuel system, so we're running a high pressure pump all the way to the throttle body, and then we're feeding it all the way back to the tank, right? So we have that the pump right there. The 100 micron cleanable filter is protecting that fuel pump. Out of the fuel pump, we go to a 7 micron filter, 33689 Wicks, or whatever equivalent. Has a big metal case fuel injection filter at 7 microns, and that's what you need to go into the fuel injection, or to a carburetor for that matter. Anything bigger than 5 microns in a carburetor will clog up the carburetor. That's why they put a 5 micron filter in the front of it. Well, before that, if you put a 7 to protect that filter on a carburetor, or you put a 7 to have the injectors not see more than a 10 micron boulder, chances are they're not going to get clogged up. So I really think that second filter is what saved me. And what we saw here with the AFR trim was the 100 micron filter clogging up with a bunch of rust and stuff from my nasty tanks. And the flow went down just enough that AFR trim picked it up. All right, so that's what that was all about. All right, now my dash has a lower 45 steering wheel, so I can see everything. There is a S10 pickup, S10 Blazer uses that steering wheel. And by the way, if you have this steering wheel and you have one that has that center button recess, I have some of those center buttons with GMC on it. If you're interested, give me a call. We can see about that. The dash, the bezel itself was again one that I had kept from Mac. I modified it to put a radio in it, double din radio. My air conditioner was moved. I have a vintage air AC system in the dash, which some of you guys have seen about that too. Really, really works. You get good air that way. The original dash air conditioner had too many bins in the ducting system. Almost no matter what you do, you're not getting real good air. Now 77, 78s maybe. So this is what I came across country with looking at my motor. All right, I could tell going across that my timing chain was loose. I could tell when my filter was clogged. Those were the two main problems that we had. And then we had an air line blowout, and my double gauges there told me about that too. All right. So you decide what kind of gauge complement or things that you want to kind of know about. If all you had was the oil pressure, water temp, and a tach or an odometer, that's really all you really need. All this stuff is a little bit superfluous, but I really wanted to know. I mean, I'm driving a 50-year-old, vintage. They say I can't say antique, it's not 50. Well, now it is 50. Well, maybe you can. Old motorhome. So I really want to know some of these things, and you may want to also. Well, look, I hope this helps. If you like this or anything in here you got, please hit like and share and subscribe on YouTube. And please go to YouTube and do that for us. I know you're over here on Patreon and you're looking at this and all this. I appreciate that. But it helps us to support all this stuff if you can go over and hit like on YouTube and like on Patreon and comments to me on Patreon. there are comments that are going to YouTube, and I don't get over there as much as when Emily kicks in. She may monitor that more. But the best way to comment to me is either call me or comment on Patreon. All right? Well, look, thanks a lot for the time. I hope you got something out of this. And ranch hands, thank you for your support. And if you'd like to be a ranch hand, I'm sure somewhere on Patreon I'll tell you how to do that. And thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.